Welcome back to Every Third House by Margery Frisbie. Chapter 8. The hospital looked as formidable on Tracy's second visit to Dr. McIntosh as it had the first time. The long corridors reminded Tracy of school. Only these halls oppressed her more. The smells were sharper, irritating to the nose like pins and needles in the hands. Not like the inviting spring freshness outdoors. Outdoor smells promised robins and forsythia and crabapple blossoms. She hated to think what these corridor smells promised. The light's too hard, too, Tracy thought. It's harsh, like searchlights from a used car dealer, not gentle like streetlights through a mist. She shivered. Tracy had to ask twice for directions to Dr. McIntosh's office because she'd been too distracted coming in to ask at the desk. She'd forgot that the doctor hadn't been in her own office the week before. When Tracy opened the door, a young aide had pointed her forward. She was sure she'd made a mistake. The room looked so comfortable. John Keels beamed in a squat ceramic vase on a sprawling coffee table. Faded flowers in the fat, overstuffed chairs around the table looked like they'd been raised in an English country garden. Behind the chairs, books ranged across the shelves that looked too relaxed to be textbooks. Oddments of statuary and personal effects separated the clumps of books. Dr. McIntosh was behind a desk as Tracy opened the door, but she jumped up quickly, as if she'd been caught out at musical chairs. "Oh, Tracy, sit right here," she said, indicating one of the fat chintz chairs. "I've been expecting you, but I had a little bookwork to catch up on. Isn't it a gorgeous day?" Tracy realised what was different. In the other office there hadn't been any window. "There are robins," Tracy said. "I noticed on my way over." Dr. McIntosh's gaze swept out to the pair of robins on the patch of lawn outside her window. "Isn't it strange how they all seem to come on the same day? Kind of like the swallows at Capistrano. One day you see your first robin, and suddenly there are robins everywhere." She took the other chair, arranged so they could face each other, and yet see the grass stretching out to the driveway. "They come the day the ground defrosts," Tracy remembered from her bird watching. "Their cafeteria opens when they can pull worms out of the ground." Interesting. Dr. McIntosh waited a second before she changed the subject. "And what's new about Mary Lincoln?" "Today is the anniversary of the day that John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln in the Ford Theatre." Dr. McIntosh started. "Tracy," she began. Then she hesitated, as if she didn't know exactly what tack to take. She began again. "Aren't you—" But Tracy was following her own trail of thoughts. "Mrs. Embry, my counsellor, told me that once I admitted my mother was mentally ill, I'd realise that it's really the human condition. She said I'd find that mental illness is everywhere. Every third house, I think she said." Tracy wasn't looking at Dr. McIntosh. She watched the robins. It's like the robins showing up at the same time all over town. Once you find out about mental illness, you discover it's everywhere. And the same thing with the Lincolns. Now I've got them in my head, I hear about them all the time. That was on the radio this morning, about how this is the day that Booth shot Lincoln. "Would you have noticed that same news brief a month ago?" Dr. McIntosh asked. Probably not. Tracy was aware how absorbed she was in the Lincolns. She collected stories about them like people collected stamps. "Now they're on my mind all the time," she told Dr. McIntosh. "I just read a book about Tad Lincoln, the family cut-up. It said that Tad's merriness made it possible for the Lincolns to survive the war. And then Tad had to die. Poor Mary Lincoln. That was after Eddie had already died in Springfield, and Willie had died of bilious fever in the White House. How did she stand it?" "What was Tad like?" Dr. McIntosh asked. "Mischievous. Very sympathetic. When he'd see women crying in the White House corridors, he'd try to help them. Once he brought a woman up to the back stairs to where his father was having a cabinet meeting. He made him sign a paper bringing her son home from the war. After Willie died, though, Tad was never the same. He didn't play with the other kids anymore, just hung around with his father. That's how he could bring his father round on things. They were very close." Dr. McIntosh nodded. She gazed into the distance, past the patch of lawn, past the parked cars, at the line of trees across the horizon. The pungent fumes of fresh brewed coffee filled the room. Bells rang. Muffled public address announcements reminded Tracy that she was in a hospital. Even so, she felt her body relax into the comfortable chintz. This one room seemed separate, hanging free of the world of wheelchairs and stethoscopes. Dr. McIntosh paused before she turned reflectively to Tracy. Was that how your brother was? My brother? How? Mischievous. Simpatico. Tracy stiffened up. She tried to think back to the days when she had a brother, when she would take him to the cartoon shows on Saturday, to toddler gym. I think he was too young for that. He was just sweet. He never did anything to upset Mum and Dad. He was easy on them. Tracy hesitated, choosing her words. I guess I'd say appealing. Yeah, that's right. He was appealing. Did he appeal to you too? Yeah. Ray was all right. I just resented getting stuck with him so much. But that wasn't his fault. He was a sweet kid. Tracy, when you were reading about Tad Lincoln, did you think about your family and your brother and how it all felt when he died? Tracy watched the clouds getting darker and lower, like they were closing in. The robins gone from the lawn. A suddenly sharper wind was blowing new buds into the air and against the window. Not really. I see a linkage. Do you think about your brother a lot, apart from Tad Lincoln? Not really. What about your mother? Did she talk about him a lot? Tracy started with surprise. Never, she said slowly, although I think she thought about him. She went through my dresser when I wasn't home and took away all my snapshots of him, his penny collection, anything that would remind her. Something she would never do ordinarily, go in drawers. At least I think it was her. They're all gone. Did you ask your mother about that? Oh no, I would never ask her about something like that. Why ever not? You never know what might happen. Dr. McIntosh looked quizzical. What could happen? Tracy felt like she was picking her way across a trampoline. When she pushed down into one part of her life, another part pushed up. Nothing was staying neatly in place. Maybe she'd break down or something? Dr. McIntosh nodded. And now she has broken down, as you say, even though no one ever asked her about how she felt. Or did someone? Her mother? Oh no, Grandmother would never bring up something controversial. Now Dr. McIntosh looked truly puzzled. Controversial? Tracy let her eyes swing back to the darkening cloud cover. Well, maybe not controversial, but, you know, a subject that might get Mum excited, dredge up buried emotions. My grandmother would never willingly get into what she calls a kettle of fish. She steers clear of any fuss, anything that might make her nervous, as she says. But your grandfather? Could your mother have talked to him? She could if she liked talking to a brick wall. My grandma does all the talking for both of them. She talks. He doesn't even nod. But it doesn't seem to bother her. Dr. McIntosh turned slowly and faced Tracy. Didn't you feel the need to talk to someone? Tell them how you felt? Maybe scream because your father was dead, your brother was dead, your mother wouldn't get out of bed? What good would that have done? You'd only get excited? Yeah. Well, you might have got some relief, started to work out your grief. I wonder if Mary Lincoln had anyone to talk to. Tracy pressed her arms against the insides of the armrests and then let go. Tracy, Dr. McIntosh's voice was insistent. We're not talking about Mary Lincoln. We're talking about you, she sighed. Oh, all right then. How did Mary Lincoln cope with her tragedies? By being extravagant and building up big debts. And your mother, Tracy, how did she cope with it? By going to bed and suspecting she'd been poisoned. And how have you coped with it? Tracy's mind bolted away from the question. Her thoughts jumped from the last time she saw Mum feed Ray in the high chair he was too big for, to worms getting eaten alive by robins in the soft ground, to Mary Lincoln. How many years ago today, holding her husband's hand as he was shot? Dr. McIntosh was patient, but persistent. You, Tracy, how have you coped with your tragedies? Do I have to cope? Can't I just go on living? Dr. McIntosh pursued Tracy's hesitancy with gentle pressure. Can you simply go on living, Tracy? Have you? Are you the same person you were before? Do you enjoy the same things? Do you have the same friends? Tracy thought about Jan. Were they really still friends? She seemed so far from her. She thought about Alan. She'd scarcely set eyes on him the last couple of weeks. Would he be on the bird walk at Crabtree Orchard? Would she? Did she have that kind of energy? What do you enjoy these days, Tracy? Dr. McIntosh inquired gently. Not much of anything. What about the Lincoln material? You seem to be pursuing that. Tracy ran her hand through her hair, as if she were brushing any thoughts of the Lincolns or anything else out of her head. Yeah, I'm pursuing it. I don't know that I'm enjoying it. Don't you enjoy something that's fun? Is anything fun for you anymore? Again, that question. Tracy's eyes travelled from the jonquils to the bookshelves to a small hexagon framing an angel with a lute. She folded her hands in her lap. Dr. McIntosh assumed her doctor face again. Your mother would like to see you, Tracy. It's been 2 weeks now. She's been asking how things were at home, how you're doing. Would you like to come over with me now, or would you like to come back tonight? Tracy's face was hot again. A vein in her temple thumped. Her throat was dry enough to keep words from getting through. Her breath came in little pants. Her brain was flying from one thought to another again. What would she say to her mother? What if her mother looked funny? What if she saw someone from school? Some kid who worked as an aide on the floor? Lots of kids at school worked at the hospital. She became conscious that Dr. McIntosh was waiting for an answer. Not now, Tracy breathed. All right, Dr. McIntosh said. Ask your grandmother to drive you over at 7. But only one visitor. I don't want your mother to tire. Explain to your grandmother. She's a lovely person. She'll understand and want what is best for her daughter. Dr. McIntosh had gone over to her desk to write down her orders for Tracy's visit. Now she looked up to check the time again. Is 7 to... Tracy, are you all right? She interrupted herself. I don't know. Tracy made a huge effort to press her leg against the cushion and shift forward. Gracefully, she thought, irrelevantly, as I was taught in charm class. But the leg didn't want to obey. Her body was heavy, not easily heaved. What is it? Dr. McIntosh repeated. It's like I can't move. But you said you wanted to see your mother, and I know she wants to see you. Dr. McIntosh held both hands out to Tracy, drawing her out of the chair. Tracy stood in front of the psychiatrist, hands at her sides. I do want to see her. Are you afraid, Tracy? What will I say? You'll just ask her how she is. And what if she tells me? Of course she'll tell you. I don't see anything frightening in that. As a matter of fact, from what you've told me, I expect your mother would not be likely to burden you with any complaints. Quite the contrary. Tracy shook her head as if she were clearing it. Then what will we talk about? Whatever you're interested in, or whatever you think might interest your mother. You could tell her about Mary Lincoln. But it's been so long, Tracy countered. Only 2 weeks. That's long enough you should have some things to catch up on. Thoreau always said that you shouldn't revisit friends until you had new experiences to share. You've both had those. You should be ready. What kind of new experiences has my mother had? She's only been in hospital. Dr. McIntosh smiled encouragingly. See, you don't really know what has gone on in your mother's mind, or in her days. You do have something to talk about. But how can I ask my mother stuff like that? Maybe she won't want to tell me anything. That's all right, Dr. McIntosh answered evenly. Then your mother has options. She can change the subject and ask about your life. She's been anxious to talk to you. Don't fret so, Tracy. It's your mother, not a boogie woman. But she's changed. Dr. McIntosh looked startled. What makes you say that? Well, hasn't she? Tracy thought it would be one thing to visit her mother the way she always was. That would be a snap. There would just be that moment of stiffness everyone feels after a trip or something. But her mother had gone into hospital because she was different now. I didn't know your mother beforehand, Dr. McIntosh admitted, but I don't think you'll find she's changed much. Perhaps she's a little more open, more free to express herself. I hope so. A little more open? More willing to talk about what's real. I think that's true of you too. Anyway, I'll be here tonight. If you have any difficulty, just ask the aide to call me and I'll come over. Maybe that would make it easier for both of you. Oh, Dr. McIntosh, would you come in with me, just this first time? No, Tracy. I think you'll be better medicine for your mother if her doctor isn't hanging around reminding her of what she might like to forget. I don't remind her of anything? Not anything negative. That's one reason I'm sure you'll be good for her. You don't seem to be the source of her trouble in any way. You're sure you won't go with me? Tracy felt like a runner whose headset had gone out, suddenly very alone for the long trail ahead. No, Tracy, but I will be there if you need me. Until next time, good night.